Subscribe to our YouTube channel and press the bell icon to get the latest updates.
Hello and welcome to The Print. By now, most of us have a fair understanding, or I should say, somewhat, a kind of understanding about the situation in eastern Ladakh, where the Indian and Chinese troops are facing each other. Many of us think that the tensions actually came about in April. However, there's a report which has come out by Stratfor, which is a global geopolitical intelligence platform, which says that since the Doklam crisis of 2017, China has actually more than doubled its military presence all along the line of actual control. The person who wrote this is Sim Tack, and he is with us to give us a comprehensive understanding of what the Chinese were up to earlier and what they are up to now and in future. Welcome to The Print, Sim.
Hi, thanks for having me.
Thank you, Sim. First of all, I should congratulate you for this excellent report that you came out with, along with ThePrint, who's a satellite imagery expert. For viewers, ThePrint is a satellite imagery expert who goes by his Twitter handle, that is @ThePrint. So, Sam, what is happening at the LAC?
So quite a lot is happening and has been happening in the past, of course. But to kind of recap the main takeaways of what we're seeing right now, essentially over the past few years, China has ramped up its construction activities at military facilities across the entire Indian border. So that means they have been expanding existing air bases, air defense sites, as well as building entirely new facilities. As you mentioned, if we count from the Doklam crisis in 2017, the total number of facilities around this border consisting of air bases, air defense sites, and helicopter ports have actually more than doubled. So in effect, we're seeing China ramp up its air power capabilities and general logistical and support capabilities to support a military activity along the Indian border.
So, Sim, are you saying that what's happening at the LAC currently is something that China has been catering for ever since the Doklam crisis?
Indeed, I think it's very clear that the current Ladakh standoff fits within a much greater dynamic. Obviously, it already fit within a greater dynamic of long-term border disputes between India and China. But what we're seeing in this ramp up in infrastructure development over the past several years between the Doklam crisis and the current Ladakh crisis is that China has clearly been prepping to take things to a next level. So essentially, start to build the future capabilities, because a lot of this is not actually finished yet, but to build the future capabilities to continue driving up that pressure and their activities on the Indian border.
Okay, from where I come, my understanding is that even if at any point of time India and China eventually resolve this particular situation that is there at the LAC, it is expected to heat up in the future too. Is this something that you would agree to, that this is not the end of it? Even if there's a resolution to the current crisis, it's not going to be the end of it. The future is going to get heated up.
Yes, I think that's a very clear conclusion. That could have already been said based on how we have seen that pattern evolve in the past. But right now, the key thing is that what China is essentially showing is an intent that moves far beyond the current crisis. So what China is doing while we have the ongoing crisis in Ladakh, what China is doing is actually building the foundations for all of the future crises. And in doing so, it's also putting a lot of weight on the Indian government, which is not just dealing with the current Ladakh crisis, but is aware of all of these adjustments in the Chinese posture and have to think long term. They have to think, how do these new Chinese capabilities affect our own ability to stake our territorial claims in these border disputes, and what does India have to do to actually keep pace with Chinese developments or provide any kind of response to it?
If you observe, if I read your report and the development that the Chinese are doing, their focus seems to be on air defense. Rather than on the ground troops, that is the army, the focus is on air defense. You have, if I'm not mistaken, there are two surface to air defense sites which have come up near Doklam, which was not there earlier. And at the same time, they've also increased the heliports. For the viewers, remember that there are air bases, and then the Chinese have what is known as the heliports, heli bases. Why do you think that Chinese are doing this?
Well, it's important to keep in mind that even though there is indeed this focus on air power in various different ways, you have to realize that air power unlocks a lot of other capabilities in a military sense. So this isn't just about deploying additional fighter aircraft into the border area. The expansion of air bases and protection of the airspace along China's border with India also allows it to deploy a much larger logistical effort into the area. So this is about deploying forces from inland China towards that border, sustain their operations by delivering supplies and equipment. And in addition to that, there's a lot of small elements, like, for example, when you talk about the heliports, one of the important roles of helicopters today is, for example, conducting combat search and rescue. So when ground forces get in engagements on the front lines in this very complex terrain, the ability to operate helicopters into that area is going to help China deal with their wounded, with the evacuation of their own forces when needed. So in a way, all of these different military capabilities are interconnected, and the general ability to achieve a higher level of air superiority or conduct more intense air operations will help the all-around spectrum of military operations.
But heliports are also important in case it can also house drones, and Chinese specializes in having multiple variety of drones. Is that also possibly that drones, both armed and unarmed surveillance drones, would be based at these heliports?
So the use of drones, or the potential use of drones at these heliports, is something that has been considered. Personally, I've not been able to observe them actually deploying drones at these heliports, even though they have an area typically that could be used as a runway for them. But of course, between the different heliports and air bases across the entire area, China definitely has the ability to ramp up their drone operations. And at some of the air bases, such as Hotan, for example, I know that we have observed actual drone-related equipment. So China is definitely already applying this in some shape or form.
Okay. So, Sim, while observing all these military, capability enhancements that the Chinese are doing, have you also come across possibility of underground bases that the Chinese are building? Because the Chinese specialize in not just having bases which are visible through the satellite, but also even underground bases. Are they building any underground facilities in this sector?
So there have been underground facilities in this sector, predating the current crises and the current buildup. We have a number of facilities near Rutog, for example, that we've observed in the past, and these underground facilities could potentially be used to house strategic assets, such as POL supplies, but also, for example, missile forces and things like that. We've not seen the underground facilities as a significant factor in the in the rapid expansion that we are currently seeing. But of course, they have been part of China's general military posture in the area.
Perfect. You know, the fact is that the Chinese have pumped in huge amount of money into building this infrastructure. The fact is that, there's a lot of work that goes into making, coming up with this infrastructure. Why do you think China is doing this? What is the ultimate aim of China, according to you?
So I think there's a few different foundations of that motivation that come together here in the India-China border area. But essentially, as China is currently seeing itself in a position of strength in the world, it has gone through tremendous economic growth over the past decades. It has started to translate that into military power. We've seen, for example, the expansion of Chinese military facilities in the South China Sea in the past. And now we're seeing China do that on the Indian border as well. So in a way, this is a continued expansion of those Chinese capabilities and translating economic power into military capabilities. On the other hand, of course, there's also the fact that the Chinese economy requires continued activity to fuel it. So in a way, you could consider these enhancements of military facilities as an interesting manner of conducting public spending, basically routing government budgets towards the Chinese economy. Now, I think that's probably a secondary advantage that China is seeing in this. The main motivation here seems to be that China is trying to lock down any kind of threats or future challenges that it might face on its western border. In the past, it has focused a lot on the Pacific-oriented coastal developments, but now we're seeing a similar push in the west, where, of course, the standoff between India and China is probably the most defining factor of that security environment.
You brought in a very important insight into this whole dynamics that are at play. Come to think of it, Sim, you've tracked the Chinese deployments very closely. We here in India, me along with other journalists, have reported on the kind of Chinese deployment that are out there. But give us a sense of the extent of Chinese deployment along the LAC in the Ladakh sector since April, if you could give us that.
So in terms of what we've seen in actual deployments, we have seen China, of course, push a large number of ground forces into the eastern Ladakh area itself. But in addition to that, we've also seen an increased presence of temporary exercises in the broader area of Western China. We've also seen facilities not immediately located within Eastern Ladakh, but nearby, such as, for example, the facilities near Rutog, expand their ability to host Chinese forces, ground forces, motor pools, things like that. So we are seeing a general shift of Chinese forces towards that border area. Of course, it's difficult to tell for a lot of these ground deployments just how much those are bound to the temporary intent related to the ongoing crisis, or how much of this is a permanent change in posture that China might be willing to maintain over the next few years, going into the next several cycles of crisis. And then when we're talking, of course, about facilities like air defense sites, air bases, it's a lot more obvious that these are very permanent facilities that will provide a permanent presence and capability into the future.
So, as you mentioned, Chinese are what the Chinese are doing are developing permanent military facilities along the line of actual control, not just in Ladakh sector, but also in the east, near Arunachal Pradesh, near Sikkim, as well as the central sector of the LAC also, which is Himachal, Pradesh and Uttarakhand area. Sim, I'm not like to. I'm not getting to the specifics of it. But when you see the Indian deployment, how do you see the Indian deployment? Is it a mirror deployment, or has India been able to match the Chinese deployment in this Ladakh sector per se?
So India has definitely responded in kind and has been pushing its own forces up to the border. Of course, India is, even though they are trying to negotiate the situation with China to calm down these current tensions, they're very actively planning for contingencies and potential breakouts of violence. And they have brought forces. I mean, we've had the reports of the tanks deployed to the area south of Pangong Tso, for example. So those things are actually happening. And China has also announced future developments of its own infrastructure. India has been less active in developing its infrastructure than China in the past several years. But we're now seeing the Indian Ministry of Defense saying, okay, we are going to start expanding our own air bases, helicopter capabilities. For now, they are talking specifically on the Ladakh sector, of course, but I would imagine that similar efforts will also emerge in Sikkim and Arunachal Pradesh.
True, that is true. Sim, with this, I come back to the main part of your report, and which talks about the fact that that these tensions are going to be there in long term. Where do you see the India-China relationship going ahead?
So that is a very big question that will depend on how exactly both Beijing and New Delhi carry themselves in the ongoing conversations between themselves. But I think that it's very clear to say, based on the Chinese preparations, that they are not planning to back down in any way. So we'll likely see a continued escalation and potential for tensions to arise. And one significant risk that I think rises from all of these developments is that as a lot more military capabilities are being concentrated in this small border area, well, it's not a small border area, but a area close to the actual border, the risk of miscalculations or localized escalations increases a lot. You have local commanders with more advanced military capabilities at their direct disposal. And if we see that violence occurring with a lot more military assets already in place, localized escalations could rapidly expand into greater conflict. And we could see returns to the actual Sino-Indian wars of the past. And that is one of the things that could, of course, be avoided depending on how the crisis or future crises are handled politically. But from a military perspective, that concentration of forces definitely increases that risk.
Absolutely, and there is no doubt about it. The fact that you have two large militaries and facing each other for extended duration, anything, a small thing can actually spiral into a larger escalation. Sim, thank you so much for talking to the Print. It was a privilege. I keep following you on Twitter, and I'm sure the viewers who are watching this will also follow you on Twitter. So it's been a pleasure so much, Sim, to talk to you, and thank you for giving us this excellent report and a larger perspective on where the India-China relationship is headed. Thank you so much, Sim.
No, thank you. It's always great to talk.